An independent study estimates that over 380,000 people have been killed in South Sudan's civil war, coupled with factors such as displacement, disruption to health facilities, and lack of food. America's top diplomat for Africa, Thibault Nage, says the Trump administration is closely watching the remarkable pace of political change in Ethiopia. And world leaders at the UN General Assembly discussed non-communicable diseases and the world's leading killers, including childhood cancer, that affects some 300,000 children and adolescents each year. Africa 54 starts right now.
Hello, good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We begin our broadcast tonight with the U.S. President Donald Trump and his wide-ranging news conference in which he railed against the Iran nuclear deal and accused China of meddling in U.S. elections. As viewers Michael Sullivan reports, Trump spoke Wednesday in New York after 3 days of meetings at the United Nations.
In a rare extended meeting with reporters, Trump said China is unhappy with trade negotiations that the United States is winning and Trump's use of tariffs to protect American interests.
They would like to see me lose an election because they've never been challenged like this. But I want to open up China to our farmers and to our industrialists and our companies.
He repeated criticisms of the 2015 Iran deal made earlier Wednesday in the UN Security Council. The U.S. withdrew from the pact, which Trump calls defective, in May this year. Trump said talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un have been productive. More are planned.
But he wants to make a deal, and I'd like to make a deal. We actually have a very good relationship.
Trump said the women who accused Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexual misconduct will get their hearing in the Senate.
They're giving the women a major chance to speak.
Trump has a meeting scheduled with Justice Department official Rod Rosenstein, who is rumored to be targeted for firing. He's a key figure in the investigation into possible Russian meddling in the last election.
But my preference would be to keep him and to let him finish up.
Trump says there was no collusion with his campaign. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Los Angeles.
Well, for an update on Thursday's events at the UNGA, VOA's Margaret Bashir joins me live from the United Nations. Hello, Margaret.
Hi, Vincent.
Now, a lot happening, of course, throughout the week. Give us an update on what has stood out today. What is the big thing?
Well, I think this morning here, there's a sideline meeting on North Korea that just wrapped up a couple of minutes ago. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo chaired it because the U.S. holds the rotating presidency of the Council this month. And it was all about North Korea. And North Korea has really been a dominant theme here this week, seizing a lot of the headlines. President Trump left early today. He wasn't at the United Nations. But Mr. Pompeo chaired this meeting. He wanted to brief Council members on where the progress has been in the U.S. talks with North Korea. He said he met with his counterpart, the North Korean foreign minister, yesterday, and they've discussed a second summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. So things are sort of moving ahead on that front. But during the meeting, well, he also said that the international community must keep on the pressure on the sanctions front on North Korea so that they will denuclearize. But Russia and China, they seem to have broken ranks now with the Security Council. It had been unanimous before. Both the Chinese and the Russian foreign ministers said they think the Council needs to start thinking about easing sanctions on North Korea because they are taking steps towards denuclearization. So we could be seeing some sort of a break in the unity now in the Council. And the U.S. has already said that they think Russia is not enforcing the sanctions strictly. So we may see some sanctions issues coming up on the horizon.
Has anything come up, at least on the continent of Africa? I mean, there are conflicts across the continent that have been unresolved for so long. Has anybody brought this to the world stage?
Sure. Well, there have been a lot of sideline meetings here this week on African issues. There was a meeting yesterday on Mali and the Sahel. There's been meetings on South Sudan, on Central African Republic. They're kind of going on more behind the scenes, not getting the headlines the way North Korea and Iran have been. And we've also got several African presidents coming up in the GA today. So I think we'll hear some more on Africa coming up later today.
Be sure, Margaret, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow again. You'll give us some more. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Vincent.
You're welcome. That's UN correspondent Margaret Beshear reporting live from New York. Now, U.S. First Lady Melania Trump says she is excited to make her first major international trip to 4 African countries next month. Mrs. Trump made the remarks Tuesday during a reception she hosted for delegates to the 73rd meeting of the UN General Assembly. The U.S. First Lady says she launched her Be Best campaign with the goal of combating some of the issues children face today by shining a spotlight on successful programs and organizations that teach children the tools and skills needed for emotional, social, and physical well-being. Mrs. Trump also recognized Microsoft Innovation and Policy Center, where students are included in Microsoft's Council for Digital Good and for designing art projects representing the individual ideas of what it means to be civil in this digital age. She also praised the work of the U.S. Agency for International Development around the world, saying she's excited to work with them on our upcoming solo trip to Africa.
On October 1st will mark the first day of my solo visit to 4 beautiful and very different countries in Africa: Ghana, Malawi, Kenya, and Egypt, all of which have worked alongside USAID and our partners to make great progress in overcoming some of their biggest challenges. I'm so proud of the work this administration is doing through USAID and others, and look forward to the opportunity to take the message of my Be Best campaign to many of the countries and children throughout Africa. Whether it is education, drug addiction, hunger, online safety or bullying, poverty or disease, it is too often children who are hit first and hardest across the globe. Each of us hails from a country with its own unique challenges, but I know in my heart we are united by our commitment to raising the next generation to be happy, healthy, and morally responsible adults.
The U.S. First Lady said when more people have opportunities and societies are more democratic and enjoy more freedoms, their countries will be safer and stronger. In Malawi, the United Nations Refugee Agency is helping thousands of Mozambican refugees return home after 3 years in the Luwani refugee camp. The refugees expressed a desire to go home after an easing of tensions between Mozambique's ruling Frelimo party and the opposition Renamo party. Lamek Masina talked to refugees at the camp and reports that they are hopeful for the future, but also realistic.
The refugees started fleeing into Malawi 3 years ago in response to fighting between Mozambique's ruling Frelimo party and opposition Renamo fighters over the disputed 2014 elections. Many of them talk of how their homes were torched and relatives killed on suspicion of hosting Renamo fighters.
Our homes were close to the place where Renamo fighters were camping, so whenever they started fighting with their rivals, we were always the victims. This forced us to flee so that we could find peace here.
The refugees now want to live a normal life.
We want to start growing our own food, doing business, so that we may have some money. Here, we just stay without any money because we do not have any employment and we do not do any business.
The refugees say they have wanted to return home since July, when authorities in Mozambique said the 2 warring sides have resolved to reach a peace deal to settle their differences.
And we are very sure that fighting has stopped now because there has not been any sound of a gun since December 2016.
UNHCR officials said they are not authorized to comment on the return because the agency and the governments of Malawi and Mozambique have yet to sign an agreement for the return of the refugees. The refugees say although they are voluntarily returning home, their future remains uncertain as the country prepares for a general elections next year.
We do not know what the losers or winners will do after elections. We do not know if the losers will accept the loss. So although we are returning, we are doubtful about our safety. But anyway, we just want to go home just for a bit of fresh air.
They say they are ready to go back to the refugee camp if the proposed peace deal flops. Malawi previously hosted more than 300,000 Mozambican refugees who fled a 16-year-old civil war between 1977 and 1992. Lamek Masina for VOA News, Neno, Malawi.
U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs Tibo Nagy says the Trump administration is watching closely the remarkable pace of political change in Ethiopia. In the second part of his interview with his interview with Africa 54's Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick, he discusses China, Nigeria, and the work of Ethiopia's new Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed.
It has been a total paradigm shift from the point of view of the Ethiopian public, but also the international community. And he was able to take these steps very quickly, including the very bold step of just saying to Eritrea, we'll comply with the peace process. We will comply with the Boundary Commission's ruling, which was not, internally, it was not an easy step for Ethiopia to take. And just all of a sudden, the borders opening up between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Ethiopian Airlines making the flight to Asmara, which I wish, when I was ambassador there, I told people I want to be on that first flight. Well, I couldn't be, but hopefully I can make it at some point soon. So again, it shows you the difference that one true leader can make, the difference that leadership can make, and the positive reaction to opening up political space. There is still a certain amount of fragility in this whole process because there is still an entrenched mindset which is very much against these kind of changes.
I want to move on to, very briefly, Nigeria. President Buhari visited the White House not too long ago. At this point and under this administration, how would you describe the relationship right now between the United States and Nigeria?
The United States considers Nigeria one of our key, I'd say even critical partners in Africa. The largest economy, or sometimes it's second largest economy, depending on how it was measured. The largest population, which will double to 360 million by 2050 and replace the United States as the world's third largest country. Tremendous, oil production, young people, dynamic, and a real, genuine security partner for the United States. We have to have a partnership. So even if the relationship was not cooperative, we would have to have some type of partnership with Nigeria because of the critical role that it plays in Africa. Having said that, we obviously will be watching closely the political process leading to the elections. Nigerian elections are always exciting to watch. To be the leader of Nigeria is probably one of the hardest jobs in the world. And so we want to be there, we want to cooperate, we want to be very supportive. And again, the United States does not have a candidate. The candidate is the process. And when the process plays out, we very much hope to remain and engage further with Nigeria as a critical partner in Africa.
China.
Yes.
Pledged $60 billion in loans and aid to African countries.
Yes.
They've said that the development that they're engaging in, they want it to be development that Africans can see, that they can touch, that's green and sustainable. Is there a race for investment, for economic, for military, for the hearts and minds, for that kind of primacy? Is there a race for primacy between China and the United States?
I wouldn't call it a race for primacy because I think America generally agrees that if there's open competition, let the best person win the competition, but let the competition be fair.
Do you think the competition is fair?
No, not in many places, but it needs to be. And the other thing that gets me is, people are touting China's numbers, and somehow they overlook the fact that we spend, I believe, $3 billion a year on fighting, with PEPFAR, with fighting diseases, incredible amounts of money on education programs in Africa, Power Africa, Feed the Future. So overall government investments and private sector investments, if you look at the totality, you know, the United States is second to no one.
Well, be sure to join Africa 54 tomorrow to hear the U.S. Assistant Secretary for African Affairs discuss the African Youth and the Young African Leaders Initiative with Africa 54's Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick. An estimated 190,000 people have been killed in South Sudan's civil war. According to an independent study, when factors such as population displacement, disruption to health facilities, and lack of food are included, the death toll is at least 383,000. The study, which covered the period between December 2013 to April 2018, showed that most of the deaths occurred in Jonglei, Unity, and the Equatorial States. The rate of deaths from the violence peaked in 2016 to 2018. Researchers used to focus on those killed in fighting in estimates of the violence of a conflict, but increasingly they also look at how war has impacted overall death rates by increasing factors such as hunger and infant mortality. Fighting erupted in December 2013 after political disagreement between President Salva Kiir and the former vice president he fired, Riek Machar. Now, the World Bank has approved $80 million in grants to Somalia to fund public finance reforms. According to the World Bank, this marks the first time in nearly 30 years that the institution has made disbursements to the government of this conflict-ridden nation. The bank says it will also work with the government in Mogadishu to improve services like education and healthcare, access to clean water, energy and finance for its citizens, and a program called Country Partnership Framework. Hit by decades of conflict at the hands of clan militias, Somalia has, over the past several years, also been pummeled by an insurgency by Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab, famines, and maritime piracy. Parts of the country are still plagued by militant violence, but a degree of stability in the capital in recent years has begun to draw investment from locals and Somalis living abroad. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook. So check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at viewer Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54, world leaders at the UN General Assembly discuss the world's leading killer diseases. But first, a look at Thursday's headlines.
Could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African Beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
Well, Pope Francis has acknowledged that the cover-up of clerical sexual abuse is driving people away from the church. He made the comments during his visit to Estonia Tuesday, just hours before the official release of a devastating report into decades of abuse by Catholic priests in Germany. And Ritual reports on the latest revelations that have threatened to engulf the papacy.
The report looks at abuse committed by Roman Catholic priests in Germany, spanning a period of 7 decades until 2014. A total of nearly 3,700 victims are documented, abused by close to 1,700 priests.
For too long, we in the Catholic Church have looked away, covered up, denied, did not want it to be true. For all the failure and for all the pain, I must apologize.
The actual numbers abused are likely to be higher, as many victims do not come forward and many records have been destroyed. Jörg Schuh works at a center for young victims of sexual abuse in Berlin.
The Catholic Church has a global problem. I would like the Pope to make it his #1 topic and for his church to really work on it. You know, in fact, the Catholic Church should be banned because it's a criminal organization.
Such is the scale of the problem now facing the Catholic Church. In Chile, all of the country's 34 bishops have offered their resignations over allegations of a cover-up. There have been similar revelations from the United States to Australia to the Netherlands. On the final day of his visit to the Baltic states Tuesday, Pope Francis acknowledged that the scandals are driving people away from the church.
They are upset by sexual and economic scandals that do not meet with clear condemnation.
For worshippers, it is a traumatic time.
We want it to end. We don't want any abuse to happen ever again. We want victims recompensed. We want perpetrators and their enablers to be punished. So we want all that to happen. So these reports are good for us, you know, that everything should come out and so we can move on.
Pope Francis has summoned top bishops from around the world for a February summit at the Vatican. Some campaigners are calling for an end to the principle that Catholic priests must remain celibate, a divisive issue.
Celibacy is not a dogma, you know, it's a discipline of the Catholic Church for priests in the West, but I think it's a great gift for the Church. I think that it's looking in the wrong place to try and change that.
But many Catholics believe the Church must change if it is to regain trust. Believers hope Pope Francis's acknowledgement of the challenge ahead is just the first step on that long road, though it's likely that more abuse scandals will be revealed in the coming months and years. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
World leaders are participating Thursday in a UN General Assembly high-level meeting on non-communicable diseases, the world's leading killers. The diseases include childhood cancer, which affects around 300,000 children and adolescents worldwide each year. Approximately 80% of children in high-income countries survive the disease, but only about 20% in low- and middle-income countries. Africa 54 health correspondent Ina Mudu spoke to Dr. Etienne Krug, Director of the World Health Organization's Department for Management of Non-Communicable Diseases, Disability, Violence and Injury Prevention. He discusses the scope of the problem and the WHO's new global initiative for childhood cancer launched during the UNGA.
Childhood cancer epitomizes inequity. There are about 300,000 new cases of childhood cancer, children developing cancer every year in the world. If a child develops a cancer in a rich country, it has an 80% chance of survival. The same child in a poor country with the same cancer would have a 20% only chance of survival. So it's a big inequity issue, and it shouldn't be. We know what needs to be done. We need to diagnose. Prevention is very hard for childhood cancer, but we need to diagnose it early and treat it, make sure people have access to medicines, that they are not too expensive, and that, you know, the whole treatment is followed. We can do that. In rich countries, it's already happening, but we can also do that in the poorer countries. This is why WHO this week is launching a new initiative, the Childhood Cancer Initiative, to scale up treatment for all children around the world and make sure that all of them have access to the treatment they need. Thereby, we can save millions of lives.
One of the challenges with childhood cancer is the fact that we don't really know the causes. So how do we even start talking about prevention, for example?
Yeah, right now we need to do more research to really understand where do these childhood cancers come from, because we know very little about the causes of childhood cancer. But we know what needs to be done to detect and treat them. So, and we can save most of these children. So for now, we need to invest in research to find out the causes and prevent, but in the meanwhile, make sure every child gets diagnosed on time and treated.
So this initiative that will be launched this week by the WHO, how much money are we talking about? Who are the different parties that are involved?
We're partnering with many different agencies for this initiative, but one key agency is the St. Jude Children's Hospital, who's providing $15 million for a 5-year kickoff of this program, which will help us scale up programs in many countries, you know, do capacity building and training of staff, set up centers of excellence where children can be referred to, improve the access to medicines. That's what we're going to focus on. And at the same time, you know, do advocacy and communication and awareness raising about the importance of dealing with this issue and about the symptoms and how to detect it and how to react to it.
And how many countries are we talking about and regions?
We'll start immediately in all regions of the world with 6 countries, and then we'll gradually scale up to 18 countries as a start. We hope to expand to all countries, really, over the years to come.
And African countries?
Of course.
Yes. And when we talk about Africa with childhood cancer, and it's not just childhood cancer, a lot of conditions that people do not understand, unfortunately, tend to be linked to some cultural beliefs. And childhood cancer, because we don't know the causes, sometimes parents feel like either it's bad luck or bad omen or something of that nature. So how much of this new initiative will include education and awareness, especially in sub-Saharan Africa?
I've worked as a doctor in Mozambique for several years. I've seen how many beliefs there can be around diseases that we don't necessarily understand, and how much time can be lost because of, lack of understanding of the importance to consult with the medical system and to try to get a diagnosis and treatment as soon as possible for all diseases, but especially also for childhood cancer. So we will try to dispel some of the myths around childhood cancer. We'll try to educate the public in general about the need to consult as soon as possible, as soon as the symptoms start arising.
What is your message then when it comes to childhood cancer, especially to the research community?
For the research community, we need to continue, of course, working on additional treatment and cheaper treatments, but there's already a lot we can do with what we have, but particularly focus on what are the causes in order to be able to prevent these things better.
And finally, when we look to the Sustainable Development Goals, and non-communicable diseases seem not to be doing so much in terms of attaining them. What are your thoughts?
There are a lot of efforts going on, but the goal 3.4 of reducing by 30% the premature mortality of NCDs by 2030 is very ambitious. We can reach it. We know enough about what needs to be done to reach it, but we need to dramatically scale up our efforts. Heads of states need to take the lead to have an all-of-government approach, and the best buys that WHO has identified as the most cost-effective interventions need to be implemented in all countries.
Dr. Etienne Krug, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, and that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show Africa News tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching, and from all of us in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. We have already learned a few idioms relating to eyes. Here is another one for you.
See eye to eye.
Do you use this phrase when you look deep into someone's eyes?
Is the yoga class over already?
I left a little early.
Why?
The instructor and I didn't see eye to eye.
You